Dog saves baby from trash on a cold night? What happens next will break your heart. Buddy's legs were heavy, the streets empty. His ribs ached, reminding him he hadn't eaten in days. He had learned long ago to ignore the hunger. There were only two things that mattered now: surviving the cold and finding something to gnaw on. Tonight, it seemed the world was quieter than usual, like it was waiting for something. His nose twitched as he stumbled across an alley, the scent of something faint, unfamiliar. A shrill cry echoed through the stillness of the night. At first, Buddy froze. He wasn't used to hearing anything like it. The sound didn't belong here, not in this dark corner of the city where stray dogs were meant to scavenge and survive, not make friends. Buddy's instincts kicked in. He followed the sound, the small voice growing louder, sharper. When he rounded the corner, his heart stopped. There, behind a stack of garbage bags, was a bundle of cloth, crumpled and small, like it had been carelessly tossed aside. At first glance, it seemed like just another piece of trash. But then it moved. Baby. A tiny, shivering child, her face pale and lips cracked from the cold. She was barely breathing, her body shaking with the bitter wind. Buddy's heart pounded as he approached, sniffing her, nudging her with his cold, wet nose. The baby was alive, but barely. Her tiny hand twitched, and her wide eyes flickered open for a second before closing again. He didn't think. He acted. Buddy nudged the baby closer to him, curling his body around her, using his own warmth to shield her from the cold. He licked her hand, his tongue brushing against her soft skin. She was so small, so fragile. He whimpered, a low sound in his chest, and then, with all the strength he could muster, he let out a desperate bark. Nothing. No answer. Another bark. And another. Buddy's ears flicked, listening for any sign of movement, any sound that could help. But the streets remained silent, as if the city itself was asleep, indifferent to the life lying in the dark alley. With his heart racing, Buddy began to circle the baby, pacing back and forth, his nose to the ground as if searching for a trail, but there was nothing. Just the overwhelming cold and the tiny, fragile life he couldn't leave behind. He barked again, louder this time, his voice hoarse from the effort. He sniffed the air, but there was no one. Not a single soul on this street cared. His tail wagged weakly as he sat down beside the baby, pressing his body against hers, trying to give her all the warmth he had left. His breath came in short, desperate bursts. How long would it take? Could he wait long enough for someone to find them? But what if no one came? Buddy's eyes darted from the baby to the street beyond, back and forth, his heart pounding in his chest. He was just a stray dog, alone in a cold world. No one would care about him. No one would come for him. He was used to that. But the baby had to survive. She didn't deserve this. One more bark. One more desperate plea. And then in the distance, a sound, a car door slamming. Footsteps. Buddy's heart leaped in his chest as he saw a figure approaching. The man came into view, his face barely visible in the dim streetlight. He looked down at Buddy, then at the baby still lying in the alley, barely breathing. Buddy stood, wagging his tail weakly as the man bent down and scooped up the child. "Hey, little one," the man muttered, his voice rough. "You're gonna be okay." Buddy watched as the man ran toward the street, shouting for help. His heart slowed, the fear dissipating, replaced by something else. Oh, the baby was going to be okay. But Buddy, standing there alone in the dark, couldn't shake the feeling that his role in this story wasn't over. Not yet. As the man disappeared into the night with the baby, Buddy stood motionless in the alley, watching the world continue on as it always had. Buddy didn't follow. He couldn't. The streets felt too empty, too vast now that the baby was gone. He had done his part, hadn't he? But something gnawed at him, an ache deep in his chest, a feeling that was too familiar. He wasn't used to this kind of responsibility, the weight of another's life in his paws. He was just a dog, a stray. And yet it felt like something more had changed. He turned away, back into the shadows, his paws dragging through the gritty streets. His stomach still burned with hunger, and his body was heavy with exhaustion, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of the baby's pale face. The man had taken her, but what if she didn't survive? What if she was too weak, too fragile to make it? Buddy paused in his steps, his ears twitching. There was something about that baby. Something in the way she'd looked at him, as if she knew, as if she was asking for help without words. The man had come. The baby was safe for now. But what would happen next? Was she just going to be another forgotten story, a forgotten soul, or would someone care enough to make sure she had a life? His legs carried him without thinking. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to be near her. Buddy found himself outside the hospital, the bright lights glaring against the night, so different from the quiet, dark alley where he'd found her. He sat just outside the door, his tail wrapped tightly around his paws, watching the entrance as if it would open up and reveal the answers he sought. He waited. Time passed, but Buddy didn't move. The night air grew colder, but he didn't mind. He could hear the distant hum of the city, the rush of passing cars, the sounds of people's lives continuing as if nothing had happened. He could have gone back to the alley, back to the corner where he usually rested, but he couldn't. Not tonight. Not after what he had witnessed. Hours passed before the door opened. A nurse stepped outside, pushing a wheelchair with a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. Buddy's heart leaped in his chest. There she was, the baby, now breathing steadily, her face softer, more alive than it had been just a few hours ago. The nurse's face was gentle, but Buddy didn't care about her. His focus was on the tiny, fragile child in the blanket. The nurse walked toward a car parked nearby. Buddy's legs twitched, the need to follow her growing stronger by the second. He had to know where she was going. He had to know that she was safe, really safe, and that someone would care for her. Buddy moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, staying just out of sight. He watched as the nurse loaded the baby into the car, then climbed in herself. The car door slammed shut, and the vehicle pulled away, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Buddy's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't stay here not knowing. He ran. His paws hit the pavement with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years, his body pushing forward without thinking. There was no plan, no destination. He just had to be sure. The car slowed at a stoplight and Buddy, moving quickly, darted across the street. He didn't care if he was seen. His only thought was the baby. He ran faster, his muscles straining, the cold air biting at his face. The car turned a corner and Buddy followed, keeping his distance. The lights of the car grew smaller as it turned into a suburban neighborhood, the quiet streets lined with houses, their windows glowing faintly in the night. The car stopped in front of a small house and the nurse got out. She moved quickly, cradling the baby in her arms as she disappeared inside the house. Buddy stopped, just out of sight, his breath ragged from the run. His heart still thudded in his chest, but something inside him told him that this was it. She was here. The baby was here. He couldn't stay any longer. He didn't belong here. He was just a stray dog, a shadow in the night. But as he stood there, watching from the darkness, he felt something stir inside him. Something warm and gentle, a feeling that he didn't know he was capable of. He had done all he could. He had saved her. And now his role was done. With one last glance at the window where the baby's small, fragile form had disappeared, Buddy turned and disappeared into the night, his heart still full, his body exhausted, but his soul, somehow, lighter than it had been before. The morning sun crept through the small window of the hospital room, casting soft shadows across the sterile walls. Inside, the faint hum of machines and the shuffle of nurses' feet filled the air, but in the quiet corner of the room, there was only the rhythmic sound of a baby's breath. Emily, barely a few hours old, lay in an incubator, wrapped in blankets, her tiny body still and fragile, her chest rising and falling with every shallow breath. The staff had worked quickly. They'd cleaned her up, stabilized her temperature, and given her the care she so desperately needed. It was a miracle, really. The doctors were cautious, reminding each other that survival wasn't guaranteed. She had been found in the trash, tossed aside like forgotten waste, but she had been given a second chance. The story of the stray dog that had found her in the alley and kept her warm, alerting someone to her presence, had already spread through the hospital. As Emily's tiny chest rose and fell with every breath, no one in that room could deny the sheer power of the moment. This baby, this fragile soul, had been saved by an act of pure instinct, by a dog who had no reason to care, and yet had cared so deeply. There was something profound in that simple act, a truth too deep to express in words. Outside the hospital, Buddy sat in the shadows, his tail tucked under his body. He hadn't moved since the nurse had carried Emily inside. He had followed her, but when she entered the building, he had stopped. He didn't belong there. He was just a street dog, just another forgotten creature in a city full of them. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He waited. And waited. His body was cold, his stomach still empty, but there was something else keeping him there. He didn't know what it was. A strange sense of duty, perhaps, or a bond he couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the feeling that, in some small way, he had made a difference. It wasn't long before a man walked up to the entrance, his face etched with worry. He was younger than Buddy had expected, dressed in a worn jacket and jeans, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Buddy watched him closely, his ears perked up, ready to run if needed. But the man didn't seem dangerous. His gaze flicked over the street, almost as if searching for something, someone. The man's eyes settled on Buddy, and for a brief moment, there was a silent exchange between them. The man knelt slowly, his movements cautious, and reached out with one hand. Buddy, wary but curious, took a few steps closer, then stopped. He couldn't explain why, but something told him the man wasn't a threat. "Hey boy," the man said softly, his voice quiet but filled with a strange warmth. "You look like you've been through hell." Buddy tilted his head, his tail giving a slight wag. The man smiled gently, though his eyes were still clouded with worry. He stood up, glancing back toward the hospital, then to Buddy again. "You were there, weren't you?" the man asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You found her." Buddy's heart skipped a beat, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar emotion. He hadn't thought anyone would connect the dots. But this man somehow knew. He had seen Buddy's desperation, felt it even from a distance. The man knelt once more, closer this time, extending a hand with more purpose. "Come on, Buddy. Come with me," he said softly. "We need to talk." Buddy didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, allowing the man to gently stroke his fur. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the man stood, Buddy followed, his paws dragging slightly on the pavement. There was something comforting about this man's presence, something that made Buddy feel as though he wasn't so alone in the world. They walked together toward the hospital entrance. Buddy glanced back once, as if unsure about leaving the hospital behind, but the warmth in the man's voice was enough to convince him that Emily was in good hands. For now, that would have to be enough. Inside, the man spoke to the staff, explaining who he was, what had happened, and how Buddy had led him to Emily. The nurses and doctors were skeptical at first, but when they heard the details, when they saw the genuine concern in his eyes, they softened. The baby, they told him, was doing better. There was still a long road ahead, but the worst was over. The fragile life that had been abandoned was now surrounded by care and warmth, a chance at a future she had almost lost before it had even begun. Buddy didn't understand all the words being spoken, but he understood the tone. He could feel the shift in the air, the change from fear to hope. As the man looked down at Buddy, he placed a hand gently on the dog's head, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Thank you for saving her." Buddy didn't know how to respond. He didn't need to. The words weren't for him. They were for Emily, for the little girl who had been saved by an act of kindness, by a dog who had no reason to care, and yet had given everything. Buddy turned, his tail giving a small wag. He felt something in his chest lighten. His job was done. The sound of voices inside the hospital grew muffled through the thick glass of the emergency room doors. Buddy's ears perked up as he heard the soft click of footsteps on the pavement. A man was walking toward him. He had been waiting for someone to take notice, to care. But the nurse hadn't returned yet. And the night, it seemed, had swallowed everything whole. The man was young, wearing a worn leather jacket, his hair tousled as if he hadn't bothered to comb it in days. His eyes were tired, but there was something else there, something that drew Buddy's attention. The same sense of urgency that had led Buddy to the baby in the first place. The man stopped a few feet from Buddy, his gaze flicking between the dog and the hospital doors. He stood there for a moment as if unsure of what to do. Then, as if by instinct, he crouched down, keeping his movements slow and calm. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice low but steady. "You're the one who found her, aren't you?" Buddy tilted his head, eyes locked on the man. The bond between them was immediate. The dog had no words, but he knew. He knew this man was connected to the baby in some way, had to be. The man extended a hand, palm open, offering it to Buddy. The dog sniffed it cautiously before giving a low wag of his tail. The man smiled, a weary but grateful smile. He rubbed Buddy's head gently, scratching behind the ears. "I don't know how to thank you," the man murmured. His voice was strained, the kind of exhaustion that came from years of worry and stress. She's my daughter, you know. My little girl." Buddy's ears twitched. His tail wagged again. The man's daughter? Buddy didn't understand all of the words, but the emotion behind them was clear. This man had lost her. And somehow the dog had found her. The man stood up, running a hand through his hair. He turned to the hospital doors, staring at them, then back at Buddy. "I was too late to stop it," he continued, almost to himself. "I couldn't be there when it mattered. But now I have a second chance. And I owe you everything." Buddy sat down, watching the man intently. There was no need for words now. This wasn't just about the baby anymore, it was about the man too. The man who had come to find her, who had risked everything to bring her home. The man took a deep breath and glanced back at Buddy. "I don't have much," he said, as if the weight of his words were too much to bear. "But I'm going to make sure she's safe. I'm going to make sure she knows she's loved. I promise you that." Buddy's tail gave one final, slow wag. The man smiled softly, then walked toward the door, his hand resting on the handle. Before he opened it, he looked back one last time at Buddy. "You're not just a dog," he said quietly. "You're a hero." The door swung open and the man disappeared inside. Buddy stayed where he was for a moment longer, his gaze lingering on the hospital. He had done his part. The baby was in good hands now. He turned and walked away. His body still ached from the night's strain, but there was something lighter in his step. Something that had been missing before. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew this: the baby was safe. And maybe, just maybe, he had found something he didn't even know he was looking for. A family. A place where he belonged. For now, that would have to be enough. The days passed, and the world around Buddy seemed to continue without him. He found himself wandering the streets again, moving through familiar alleys and sidewalks, but something had changed. He no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt like just a stray. His mind kept returning to the hospital, to the baby, and to the man who had promised to take care of her. But Buddy didn't stay close. He couldn't. He had done what he needed to do, and now it was time for him to move on. The world had a strange way of turning its back on creatures like him, and Buddy knew that. He had lived on the streets for too long to believe in fairy tales. People were kind for a moment, but that kindness rarely lasted. So, as much as he wanted to go back and see if the baby was okay, he didn't. He kept his distance, unsure of where his place was in a world that could offer him so little. It was late afternoon when the man found him again. Buddy was curled up on the sidewalk near a cafe, hoping for a scrap of food, his eyes half closed, body still tired from the weeks of uncertainty. He heard footsteps approach but didn't lift his head. Not yet. But the voice that called his name, gentle, familiar, made him pause. "Buddy?" He lifted his head slowly, his tail giving a soft thump against the pavement. It was the man, the one who had come for the baby. His face looked different now. The worry lines were still there, but there was something else too: hope. A quiet kind of hope, as though he had finally found peace. The man knelt down to Buddy's level, his eyes soft. He reached out a hand slowly, and Buddy, after a moment of hesitation, let him pet the back of his head. "I've been looking for you," the man said, his voice low, filled with a new kind of warmth. "I've been meaning to thank you properly." Buddy's ears perked up. He wasn't used to gratitude, not like this. He was just a dog. But the man's words, there was a sincerity in them that Buddy couldn't ignore. "I don't have much," the man continued, "but I wanted to give you this." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a collar, a simple, sturdy thing with a tag hanging from it. The tag had the name Buddy engraved on it. Buddy's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was a name, a promise, a connection. The man attached the collar around Buddy's neck, his fingers brushing against the dog's fur as he adjusted it. "You deserve more than just a scrap of food," the man said quietly, "and more than just a few kind words. You deserve a home." Buddy looked up at him, his tail now wagging softly, uncertain but full of warmth. The collar wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a symbol. It was proof that he mattered, that he had made a difference. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" the man continued, as if understanding Buddy's thoughts. "I know you're not used to this. But I want you to know you're not alone anymore. You're part of this family now." Buddy's heart beat a little faster. A family. The word echoed in his mind over and over again. He had never had one before. He had never needed one before. But now it seemed he was part of something bigger than himself. The man stood up slowly, looking down at Buddy with a smile. "Come on, Buddy. Let's go home." Buddy followed him without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a place to be. A home. A real home. As they walked side by side down the street, Buddy glanced up at the man, his collar jingling softly with each step. It wasn't a perfect world, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The past was behind him, and a new chapter was waiting to be written. And Buddy? He was ready to live it. Days turned into weeks, and Buddy settled into his new life. The man, whose name was Adam, had kept his promise. Buddy had a warm bed now, a place to call his own. Adam's small apartment wasn't much, but it was a home. And that was more than Buddy had ever hoped for. The baby, Emily, was doing better too. Adam had been there for every milestone, her first smile, her first time reaching out for his hand. He had poured all his love into her, something he hadn't been able to do when she was born. The guilt still lingered in his eyes sometimes, but when he looked at Emily, all he saw was hope. A second chance. A gift. And Buddy, in a way, was part of that gift. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the apartment, Adam sat on the couch with Emily cradled in his arms. Buddy lay at his feet, content, eyes half closed as he listened to the soft murmur of his family. The rhythmic sound of Emily's breathing filled the room, and for the first time, Buddy felt truly at peace. But peace was a fragile thing. The doorbell rang sharp and sudden. Adam stiffened, a slight tension in his shoulders. Buddy raised his head, his ears pricking up. He sensed the change too. Something was off. Adam stood, adjusting Emily in his arms, and walked to the door. When he opened it, Buddy saw the figure standing there, an older man with weathered features and a stern look on his face. His eyes flickered over Adam before resting on Emily, and for a long moment neither spoke. Finally, the man cleared his throat. "I'm looking for my daughter." Adam froze, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. His heart began to race. He had known this day might come, but he wasn't prepared for it. The man was her biological father. He had no legal right to Emily, Adam had made sure of that. But there was a history there, one that Adam had spent years trying to forget. Buddy growled low, a warning in his chest. Adam placed a hand on the dog's head, trying to calm him, but he felt the same surge of protectiveness that Buddy did. This man, this stranger, was no longer welcome. "Who are you?" Adam asked, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it now. He stepped slightly in front of the door, as if to shield Emily from the stranger's view. He wouldn't let him take her. Not after everything they had been through. "I'm her father," the man replied. "I've been looking for her." Adam's grip on the door tightened, his eyes narrowing. "You lost that right the moment you walked away," he said coldly. "Emily is with me now." The man's expression faltered, but only for a moment. He looked at Buddy, who was still growling at his feet, then back at Adam. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his tone softer now. I just want to know she's okay." Adam shook his head, his chest tightening. He couldn't let this man back into their lives. Not after everything he had done. Not after abandoning her. "You should have thought about that before you walked away," he muttered, his voice thick with anger and hurt. There was a long silence between them. The man seemed to consider Adam's words carefully before he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I don't want to cause trouble. I didn't know what happened to her. I thought I had lost her forever." Adam's jaw clenched. He had no sympathy for the man standing in front of him, not after everything he had put Emily through. But something in the older man's eyes shifted, just for a moment, and Adam felt the tiniest flicker of doubt. "You don't deserve to see her," Adam said firmly. "But if you really care about her, you'll leave. She's safe now. And that's all that matters." For a long moment the man said nothing. Then with a heavy sigh he nodded. "I'm sorry," he muttered, stepping back from the door. "I just wanted to know she was okay." Adam didn't respond. He didn't need to. He stepped back into the apartment, closing the door quietly behind him. Buddy sat by his feet, his posture relaxed now, sensing the tension had passed. Adam walked back to the couch and sat down, pulling Emily close once again. She let out a small, contented sigh, resting her head on his chest. Buddy lay back down on the floor, his eyes never leaving Adam and Emily. He had done his part. He had protected them. And that was enough. For now, everything was as it should be. Adam looked down at Emily, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "You're safe," he whispered softly. "I'll never let anyone hurt you." Buddy's tail wagged softly against the floor. They were together, and that was all that mattered. The family they had created, the bond they shared, it was stronger than anything the world could throw at them. They had survived the worst. And now they were free to move forward. A new life built on love. And Buddy? He was part of it every step of the way. Time moved on, and for a while, everything felt like it was finally settling into place. Buddy, Adam, and Emily had become a family in the truest sense of the word. The mornings were filled with laughter, and the evenings with quiet moments that made everything feel right. Adam had even started taking Buddy to the local park, something he'd never done before. The dog ran freely, chasing after sticks, and Adam felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. But peace, as they had learned, was fragile. It was a sunny Saturday when the test came. Adam had taken the day off work, and they were all in the living room, Emily on the floor playing with a new toy, while Buddy rested at Adam's feet. The air was filled with the calm hum of domestic life, a life Adam had never dreamed possible after losing so much. The knock at the door shattered the silence. Adam's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't been expecting anyone. He set his coffee cup down carefully, casting a quick glance at Buddy. The dog's ears were alert, his eyes focused. The growl that rumbled low in his chest was immediate. "Stay," Adam whispered softly to him, the command calm but firm. He walked toward the door, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. When he opened it, the sight on the other side nearly took his breath away. It was the man, the one who had shown up before. The one who had claimed to be Emily's father. This time, there was no uncertainty in his eyes. There was no hesitation. "I need to talk to you," the man said quietly, his voice steady but thick with something Adam couldn't quite place. Adam felt his body tense. His instinct was to shut the door, to turn this man away once and for all, but something stopped him. A deeper fear, something instinctual. "What do you want?" "I want to see her," the man said, his eyes dark and searching. "I know I've lost the right to be in her life, but I just need to see her. I need to know she's okay." Adam stood there, his hand resting on the doorframe, unsure of what to say. The man had left, disappeared for years, and now he was asking for something Adam couldn't just give. Not after all the hurt, all the fear. "Please," the man added, his voice breaking. "I can't live with the thought of her not knowing I tried." Buddy's growl deepened, louder now. Adam's gaze flicked down to him, the dog's body stiff, his eyes narrowed. He was warning, protecting, the way he had always done. Adam glanced back at the man, his hand still gripping the doorframe tightly. He couldn't let him back in. "No," Adam said firmly, shaking his head. "You don't get to come back now. You walked away when she needed you most. You don't get to waltz back into her life and pretend everything's fine." The man flinched, as though the words had struck him harder than he expected. There was a moment of quiet between them, and then the man spoke again, this time his voice softer. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. He swallowed hard. "I just want her to know I tried. I want her to know that I cared, even if it wasn't enough." Adam didn't respond at first. The man's words were honest, raw, and for a fleeting second, Adam felt the weight of what it meant to be a father, to carry that responsibility. But the pain of what had happened still lingered, deep inside. "I'm her father now," Adam finally said, his voice steady but his heart aching. "And I'm not going to let you hurt her again." Buddy's tail was rigid now, his hackles raised, a clear sign that the situation was escalating. Adam could feel the dog's protective energy, as though Buddy knew the stakes better than anyone. The man looked at Buddy, and for a long moment, there was a flicker of regret in his eyes. He took a step back, lowering his head, almost defeated. "I never meant to hurt her," he said quietly. "I never meant to leave." Adam said nothing. The door remained half open between them, the space between them a chasm that couldn't be crossed. Finally, the man turned, his shoulders slumped, and he walked away without a word. Adam stayed by the door, his heart heavy. He didn't feel relief. He felt a quiet sorrow for the man who would never be part of Emily's life. Buddy walked over and nudged Adam's leg with his nose, his eyes soft and knowing. Adam knelt down to pet him, his fingers threading through Buddy's fur. The dog had been his constant companion, his protector, through everything. "I don't know if I did the right thing," Adam murmured, his voice quiet in the empty air. Buddy's tail thumped against the floor as if to say, "You did. You always do." As Adam stood up, he looked down at Emily, who was now standing by his side, her little hand clutching his pants. She looked up at him, her innocent eyes full of trust, and in that moment, Adam knew that no matter what happened, no matter the past, she was safe now. She was loved, and no one could take that away from them. Not now. Not ever. The day after the man had come and gone, Adam sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee. His thoughts were heavy, swirling like a storm inside his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The man's plea, his sorrow, and the unspoken guilt that still clung to him, despite everything he had done, or hadn't done. Adam wasn't a perfect man. He had his flaws, his regrets. But when it came to Emily, there was no room for compromise. Emily was his. She had been his from the moment she had needed him most, and there was nothing anyone, least of all her biological father, could do to change that. Buddy lay at his feet, his large body stretched out across the floor. The dog had not left Adam's side since the man had shown up at the door, and Adam couldn't help but feel a deep, unspoken gratitude for him. Buddy was more than just a dog. He was a protector, a reminder of how far they'd both come. Adam stood up and walked to the window, his gaze lingering on the view of the quiet street outside. It was peaceful here in the small bubble they had created. But peace he knew was fragile. The visit from Emily's father had stirred something in him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. The world had a way of throwing obstacles in their path, and he couldn't help but wonder when the next one would appear. But then he heard Emily's laughter echoing through the apartment, and it brought him back to the present. He turned away from the window and walked into the living room, where Emily was sitting on the floor, her toys scattered around her. She looked up as he entered, her big blue eyes sparkling with joy, and she reached out her arms toward him. "Daddy," she squealed, her voice full of innocence and trust. Adam's chest tightened. His heart swelled. She was so small, so perfect, and she had no idea of the world that existed outside this apartment. The world that had abandoned her, the world that had almost taken her from him. In this moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the uncertainty, not the hurt. Only this. He knelt down to her, pulling her into his arms, holding her close. She rested her head against his chest, her small fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. "I love you, little one," Adam whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll always keep you safe." Buddy walked over, his paws patting softly against the floor, and nudged Adam's hand with his nose. Adam smiled, looking down at the dog who was wagging his tail gently. Buddy had been his constant companion through everything, the good, the bad, and the uncertain. They had both been through so much together, but in this moment, it was as if everything had finally come full circle. "You've been my guardian angel, haven't you?" Adam murmured to Buddy, his voice soft with emotion. The dog's eyes locked onto his as if understanding every word. Emily giggled in Adam's arms and Buddy leaned in, his warm nose brushing against her cheek. She giggled again, reaching for him, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like time had stopped. "This is what matters," Adam whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You too. This family." The doorbell rang again, a sharp sound that cut through the air. Adam's heart stilled, and he felt a surge of protective instinct rise up. His first thought was that it was the man again, the father, coming back to cause trouble. But then he realized something. He wasn't afraid anymore. Adam stood up, setting Emily down gently, though her tiny hands clung to him. "Stay here," he said softly, his voice steady. "I'll take care of it." Buddy followed him to the door, his ears alert, his body tense, but this time Adam wasn't nervous. He wasn't uncertain. They had come too far to be torn apart by fear. Adam opened the door slowly, peeking through the crack. It wasn't the man from the day before. Instead, it was a delivery person holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Package for Mr. Adams," the delivery person said, holding it out. Adam blinked, momentarily confused, then stepped aside to take it. The package was light, almost too light to hold any real weight. He thanked the delivery person and closed the door. As he sat down at the kitchen table, Emily and Buddy following him, he carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small, folded note. Adam opened it with trembling hands. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for what I put you through. Please take care of her. I never meant to hurt her. She's in good hands now. I can live with that." There was no return address, no signature, just a quiet acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Adam sat back in his chair, staring at the note, the words swimming in his mind. The man had made his peace. He had come to terms with the reality of his mistakes, and he had finally understood that Emily's future was no longer in his hands. Buddy nudged Adam's leg, his warm body brushing against his. Adam stroked the dog's head absent-mindedly, his thoughts still lingering on the note. But in the end he knew one thing for sure. It didn't matter what the man had said. It didn't matter who had come before him. He was Emily's father. He had kept her safe. He had given her a chance. And no one could take that away. Not now. Not ever. Buddy lay down at his feet, his tail thumping gently against the floor, a quiet symbol of the protection and love that surrounded them all. Together they had survived. And together they would face whatever came next. Because this was their family. And nothing else mattered. The days that followed felt like a quiet promise. A vow to keep going no matter the shadows that might loom ahead. The note from Emily's biological father lingered in Adam's thoughts, but instead of weighing him down, it lifted him. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than the man could ever understand. Adam knew the truth now. Emily was his. She had always been his. And nothing could change that. The sun rose each morning, casting its golden light through the kitchen window, where Adam would sit, holding Emily on his lap while Buddy rested by his feet. The routine had settled into something comforting, something they all depended on. It was in these quiet moments, sipping coffee, listening to the soft gurgle of Emily's laughter, feeling the weight of Buddy's steady presence, that Adam realized how far they had come. But there was still so much to be done. Emily had started crawling, her little hands reaching for everything she could get her hands on. Adam watched with a quiet pride as she pushed herself forward, her determination shining through with every movement. There was something special about the way she explored the world, the way she trusted him to guide her. It reminded him of how much they had both needed to heal, to grow, to rebuild. And Buddy was there every step of the way. The dog had become more than just a protector. He was Emily's guardian angel. He watched over her with a quiet devotion, always by her side, whether she was playing with her toys or taking her first steps. Buddy's bond with Emily was something Adam couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just love, it was a deep, unspoken connection, as though they understood each other in a way no one else did. One afternoon, as Emily sat on the floor, giggling at the sight of Buddy rolling around with a toy, Adam took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. He thought about the man at the door, about the uncertainty and fear that had clouded his world not so long ago. It was a chapter of his life that had been painful and confusing, but now it felt distant, like a story he could put behind him. "Look at her," Adam said softly to Buddy, his voice thick with emotion. "She's growing up so fast. And it's all because of you." Buddy wagged his tail, his eyes soft, as if he understood that Adam wasn't just talking about Emily's growth. He was talking about his own, about the way Buddy had helped him find a purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. Life had a way of testing you, Adam thought, of throwing obstacles in your path when you least expected them. But it also had a way of rewarding you for the strength you didn't even know you had. And for Adam, his reward had come in the form of Emily and Buddy. Together, they were the family he had always dreamed of but never believed was possible. That evening, as they all sat down for dinner, Emily in her high chair, her eyes bright as she tried to scoop up her food, Adam couldn't help but feel a sense of overwhelming gratitude. He had been given a second chance, something he had never expected. And no matter what had happened in the past, no matter the mistakes or the pain, he would never take it for granted. After dinner, as the sun began to set, Adam stood at the window, looking out at the world beyond. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that made everything seem right. Emily had fallen asleep in her crib, her tiny body curled up under the soft blanket. Buddy lay near her, his eyes half closed in contentment, as if he knew his job was done, for now. But Adam knew better. His job would never be done. He had made a promise to Emily, to Buddy, to himself. He would always protect them. He would always be there no matter what. Because this life they had built together was worth fighting for. It was worth every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night. It was worth it because they had each other. And that was enough. "Thank you," Adam whispered, his voice barely a breath in the quiet room. He didn't know if he was thanking Emily or Buddy, or maybe even the universe for giving him this chance. But it didn't matter. He looked down at Buddy, whose eyes met his with a knowing gaze. Adam smiled, a small, soft smile that spoke of love, of understanding, and of a bond that would never be broken. "Let's keep going," Adam said, his voice steady, full of purpose. "Together." Buddy's tail thumped softly against the floor in agreement, a quiet affirmation of the journey they had started, and the one that lay ahead. The future was uncertain, as it always would be. But Adam had learned something important. As long as they had each other, they would be okay. Because no matter what came their way, they were a family. And families stayed together. They fought together. They healed together. And for the first time in a long while, Adam felt at peace. As Adam looked down at Buddy, feeling the weight of their bond, he knew that family wasn't always about blood. It was about the love, the sacrifices, and the unwavering commitment to protect one another. Emily, a child rescued from the shadows of her past, now had the future she deserved. And Adam, the man who once thought he had nothing left to give, found himself with everything. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes. They simply choose to stay, to fight, and to love. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of second chances, share it. Let it remind others that no one is ever truly alone. Leave a comment telling us what family means to you, like if you believe in the strength of love, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories of resilience, hope, and heart, stories that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark, don't forget to subscribe. Because just like Adam and Buddy, we're in this together.